Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Acceptance Unit Teacher Certification Course. If you're standing, whether you're here or far away, you can please be seated. And if you're watching online, please remember you can go to the top of the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page to download the book that we're using tonight. It's the Acceptance Unit Teacher's Manual. If you'll go to the top of the page, you'll see the Character Unit download. There should be a little button next to it, a little drop-down arrow. Click on that, and you should see the Acceptance Unit. If you'll click there, you'll open the book, and you can follow along with us. And we encourage everyone to do so. Reading and following along with the teacher is going to give you the best results. Okay, so last time we're going to pick up, I think we went over page 28, which was intolerance leads to conflicts. We talked about, the conflict, war, the Holocaust, the Civil Rights Movement, the September 11, 2001 event. Hopefully everyone still has that in their mind. We're gonna quickly review some of the things we went over, but then we're going to move forward. One thing I want to remind you or put into your mind that, in fact, let's read it. I believe it's on page 28. Where it says the Civil Rights Movement. It talks about. It says at the last line, it says, in a short period of time over the 50s and 60s, the Civil Rights Movement put an end to racial discrimination. Circle those words, by the law. By the law. It put an end to racial discrimination by the law. But did it put an end to racial discrimination in people's brains? Absolutely not, because it still exists. Do you think there's any law they can pass to get anyone to be tolerant of others? Do you think there's a law that can be passed to get people to stop hating people because of their nationality, their ethnicity, their skin shade, etc.? Do you think there's some kind of law they can pass to do that? Think about it. There's laws against murder. There's also a death penalty for murder in some cases, in capital offenses, capital cases. Does that stop people from murdering people? No. We live in Texas. This is a death penalty state. People are put to death occasionally, men and women, for certain heinous crimes. But that doesn't stop people from making the choices they make at the time. Matter of fact, most people that murder people, if you would talk to them today on death row and you would ask them, would you do the same thing that if you'd have known what would take place, would you have done what you did? If you could do it all over again, would you do it again? Most of them would tell you no. They would like to go back and change that decision, but it's too late. But the point is, the Civil Rights Movement, it changed laws. Laws were changed, but the hearts and minds of the people were not changed by that event. And that's why the Peaceful Solution is here to change the hearts and minds. If you look on the front cover of the book, the only thing that'll change the hearts and minds is education and moral character. Okay, and that's why, everyone in the world needs to learn to value other people. And first they need to value themselves. If they can't value themselves, they won't value anybody else as important or worthy of living, or worthy of living in peace, safety, and security. And that's why this information, if we download it into the minds of people, it makes a difference, because it puts something in there that they didn't know and they didn't have before, that they can consider before they call someone names or before they do something to someone, just because they're a certain gender or certain they have certain they come from a certain area of the world, etc. Okay, so with that thought in your mind, You know, I want you to think about, it made me think about something that's being in the news right now. It's really big in the news right now about critical race theory. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But I do want to, I want to go over it a little bit, because as educators, we really need to know what we're talking about and what we say we're for or we say we're against. Okay? And right now, depending on what political spectrum you belong to, I guess, critical race theory is either a really bad idea or it's a really great idea, just depending on whether you're, you know, on one side of you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever you might be in the political field. But let's look at some facts about what they teach about critical race theory, because they say that critical race theory is necessary right now in order to put a stop to racial discrimination. Even though the civil rights, all the laws that were passed after the civil rights movement didn't do much. It made great advances, but it still didn't change a lot of people's thinking. Let me tell you the five basic tenets, they say, of critical race theory. First of all, they say race is not real. Is that true or false? Well, according to the Human Genome Project, it took 13 years to actually do this study where they took the entire human genome, or all the different genetic samples of all peoples throughout the whole earth. It was a 13-year study. And they actually found out that that's the case. There is no such thing as race. Okay? That the human race is one race. And we talked about that last time. So that first tenet of the critical race theory is actually true. Okay? The second thing they say is that racism isn't just because there's a few bad apples, but racism is embedded in America's culture, society, and legal codes, or, you know, their laws. Racism exists in schools, workplace, and businesses. It's everywhere. Okay, there you might have, you know, some generalization going on, because it's not really everywhere, because it's not here. It's not here in the peaceful solution, right? So it's not everywhere. So that's not a fact that it's everywhere, even though, you know, in a lot of places that you go, it exists in people's hearts and minds. But not, you know, just because a certain person works for a certain company, because they said it's in schools, it's in workplaces, and it's in businesses. Well, sure, there might be a business where certain people don't respect certain people, and they don't necessarily get along with certain people because they're a certain color, etc. But that's in the heart and mind of the individual. You can't, you know, when you say that everyone in the school is racist, what you're doing is you're generalizing or you're stereotyping, which is something we're teaching against, right? We don't want to generalize or stereotype people. We can't judge a whole group of people based on the conduct of an individual, correct? So we don't want to, we can't say it's everywhere. Even though it is everywhere, it doesn't mean everybody everywhere thinks the same way. Okay, so now, so that is a faulty, remember, this is called critical race theory. Theory means it's an idea, it's someone's opinion, right? Number 3, they have a commitment to social justice. I'm sure you've heard of social justice warriors, etc. Something big in the news now. But critical race theory seeks to address why racial disparity exists in America in order to eradicate racism and eliminate oppression. They don't want to just get rid of racial oppression, but they want to get rid of all forms of oppression. Well, we're for that too, right? We would like to eradicate racism and all forms of oppression. So we're on board with that. What they're trying to figure out is, why does it even exist here in America? Why does it exist? Well, the simple answer is, and I think even the youngest child here could probably answer, it's the moral character or lack of moral character that has been taught to an individual. Okay, that's why it exists. Okay. Number 4, The importance of experience knowledge. They say that storytelling, biographies, parables, narratives, family histories of colored people are crucial to understanding racism and changing society for the better. So in other words, you remember I told you last class that my mom and dad had me watch the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, who was a colored woman that lived in the Civil War era, and lived through the Civil Rights era. She was 110 years old. It was actually a fictional story, but it took you through that journey of 110 years between the Civil War and the Civil Rights movement. And it did help because, remember, we need to learn empathy for people. We need to learn, we need to be thinking, how would I feel if I was that person going through that, particular era of time, and going through all the taunting and the teasing and the bullying and the oppression and the hatred that these people suffered through. I think that's important for us to understand, okay? But, when you watch a movie, remember in the character unit, talked about movie watching and, feelings. When you're watching a movie, you have certain feelings because, you're watching, if it's a sad movie or there's things that are taking place, if you're a compassionate person and you see someone suffering in some way, you might feel really bad about that. But does that feeling last in every situation? Do you remember that feeling all the time? So 10 years later, after you watch that movie and you're dealing with a person of color, and does that mean you're necessarily going to treat that person the right way just because you felt bad 10 years ago from watching a movie? No. Although it does help, this experience knowledge, in other words, reading stories, biographies, narratives, family histories, etc., it does help, but that's not what's going to change the hearts and minds of a person or people. Again, we need to be educated in this moral character. We need to be taught to be respectful. We need to be taught to be, compassionate, merciful, etc. And then the fifth and final tenet of critical race theory is actually, it says, it emerged in the 70s. The scholars who formulated this theory sought to figure out why racial inequality persists even decades after laws have been passed. And why is racism still enduring, and how do we truly abolish it? Again, I think that's a simple answer. It's not simple to do, but it's a simple answer. It's education. Okay? So they have some great ideas. Okay, it's not like you can just say, well, all of this is just, there's great ideas that they have. If they would couple it with the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, we could put a huge dent in this racism and this hatred and this lack of care and concern for other people that we see in the world. The problem with critical race theory is it stereotypes all whites as white supremacists. I mean, in the mind of people, certain people that are teaching it, not all people, but certain people that teach it, in their mind, that all white people think the same about colored people, and that's just not a fact. So we need to remember that. Also, when you think about the Holocaust on page 28, remember we talked about the Nazi ideology, that, in order to keep, we need to take over everyone's land, and we need to, conquer our enemies so we can get their land and grow crops to feed our children, our pure Germanic children, so we can continue to expand and go throughout the earth. Well, do you think that ideology disappeared after World War II? When Hitler was killed and America won the war? Do you think that the Nazi ideology disappeared? No. As a matter of fact, a lot of those the people in the Nazi party were brought right here to America to help in the war effort to build bombs and make rockets. They called it Project Paperclip. And then a lot of Nazis ran off to South America to places like Brazil, Argentina, etc. So their ideas are still alive. They're still alive and well, because their ideas they taught to other people, they spread to other people. So you can't think that just because these things are in the past that somehow things have changed now. Okay? These are just examples of how intolerance has existed for thousands of years. And until everyone's taught moral character and everyone's practiced and had the opportunity to practice, first of all, learning to value people, learning to value themselves, learning to have that care and concern, learning what moral values are, how, a person with moral values would never do anything to hamper someone's peace, safety, and security, but they would always do things to build other people up and lift other people up. Until people are taught this way, it's going to persist. We're always going to have the problem. But we're making a huge dent in it right now, right? Because, everybody that's learning the peaceful solution, and there's thousands of people that have learned the peaceful solution in the past and are still learning today. Those people are spreading these great ideas throughout the whole world, and it impacts other people. The thought of there's only one race. I remember when I was first told that, I thought, that makes a lot of sense. I never thought that way. And I never heard of the Human Genome Project, but I heard it from the Peaceful Solution. There's only one race, the human race. And I thought, that makes sense. Okay? But it was one of those frying pan moments, that you have in the Peaceful Solution, because the Peaceful Solution is so simple. Okay? It's very simplified, and it should be simple. Okay, so, all right. Let's go ahead and turn back to LP2D. LP2D. No, let's not. We don't have to yet, because I still haven't read page 29. Let's go ahead and read page 29 first. At the top of page 29, it says, "No one should be made to feel as if he or she is less than who they are, just so someone else can feel great about their self for a short time." Now, did you notice how I degenderized that? It says no one should be made to feel as if he is less than who he is. Now, if a girl was reading that, they might think, well, why aren't you mentioning the girls too? Aren't we important? Right? Well, you are important. Everyone's important, and no one should be feeling like they're less than somebody else. Everybody should feel, and nobody should be making other people feel like they're less than someone else. Okay? But again, that's learning. We have to learn to value other people and see that everyone can contribute to society. Everyone has the potential to contribute, no matter who they are. Okay? No matter how old they are, whether they have one leg or two legs, or whether they have no legs, whether they have one eye or two eyes, doesn't matter. Okay? Everybody can contribute in some way, shape, or form, and everyone's important in this world. So no one should be made to feel as if they're less, just so someone else can feel great about their self for a short time. And remember, the Holocaust came and the Holocaust went, right? So for a short time, a certain group of people felt really great about themselves, right? But it didn't last, did it? And that's what this is saying, is no one should have to suffer these things just for somebody else to feel great about themselves. Now, here's what intolerance leads to. It leads to devaluation or devaluing of human life, violence, conflicts, hate, and distrust or fear. Do you see anything positive that it leads to? Nothing positive there, right? Distrust and fear. That's a huge thing. Right now, there's a lot of distrust and fear everywhere. And it's only getting worse, When you read the newspaper, some of the news these days, there's a lot of distrust amongst groups. There's distrust among the population and the police. There's distrust amongst the different whites and blacks, Mexicans, and whatever culture you're from. There's a lot of distrust amongst people, and it's being fueled by these ideas that people are putting out. I know I never really think much about what they call race until I turn on the news and I hear about it. And they keep talking about it. You know, it's like man, you know, the way it sounds like everywhere you go, you know, there's just all this racial discrimination going on, you know, everywhere. It's like it's a big plague. And you have to remember too, the news has a way of hyping certain things up and making it seem like it's something bigger than it actually is. And you know, America has made a lot of progress in that area. We've had a colored president, okay? And, you know, it's not, you know, that wouldn't be possible back in the civil rights area, so they have made some advances. But again, you know, critical race theory, they say that, well, the only reason that was allowed is because they only do things that are politically expedient for them at the time. But they don't really feel, you know, their hearts and minds haven't changed about colored people. Well, that might be the case in some cases, but again, we can't generalize with everybody because not everyone sees that way. So let's go ahead and turn to LP2D, and let's look at instruction number 5. It says, instruct students to turn to page 30 and 31 of their handbook and read their sections entitled, Just How Different Are We? Discuss the implication of how different we all are by asking students if there are any valid reasons for separating and classifying people into categories called races. You know, and think about this for a minute. Depending on where you're at, I know I used to live in Laredo, so there wasn't, you know, when you're living in a community where there's really not any racial differences, like it was all a Spanish community mainly, they didn't really think much about this, okay? But if you're in a community like Houston, Texas, or some other big city, you know, you have all people of all different spectrums, okay? And this can be a touchy subject for people too. Remember I told you the other day, just talking about race can be touchy to some people. So you have to be careful too how you go about teaching the peaceful solution or teaching this particular subject. But it says, guide further class discussion by asking the following questions. Now, you can answer this if you'd like. How many races are there? Okay. Yeah, there's one. It's the human race. Okay. And that really should be, you know, if a person really stops and thinks about it, if they use their common sense, it's true. I mean, they would agree with that. What percentage of our genes account for our physical differences? It says 0.1%. That's a very, 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 very tiny, minute difference in human beings there. And I think that only accounts for the hair texture and skin shade. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn to page 30. And let's look at just how different are we. Now, with so much emphasis placed upon our physical differences, the color of our skin, as well as where we are from, you would think that we were very different. So test your knowledge. Take the quiz below, then read the following articles on the latest discoveries about race. All right, so circle the correct answer. How many races of people are there in the world? A, 7, B, 10, C, 12, or D, 1? 1, yes, it's D, 1. Okay, and what percentage of our genes accounts for our physical differences? 20, 30, 60, or 0.1%? All right, great. Well, you already given the answer, so I expect you would give that. But you might get varying answers from people that haven't been taught yet about these things, okay? So don't be surprised if somebody thinks it's much higher or than 0.1%. That's a very, if you think about it, 0.1 is, that means 99.999% is the same, okay? That's a lot. So let's look at these articles here. Biological differences among races do not exist. WU research shows. It says race doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't even exist in humans. While that might sound like the idealistic decree of a minister or rabbi, it's actually the conclusion of an evolutionary and population biologist at Washington University. And remember, he's not the only one. They mapped out the entire human genome and came to that same conclusion, that there is no race. There's no races. I'll be glad when that's out of the vocabulary other than running a race, like, I mean, because all it does is put this idea in people's mind that there's some kind of difference between us, one group's better than the other, or there's something that's sinister, or something that's sinister and different about that group over there. No. We're all human. We just look different. Like I said the other day, we all look different. Okay? None of us look the same. So it says, Alan R. Templeton, PhD, professor of biology and arts and sciences, has analyzed DNA from global human populations that reveal the patterns of human evolution over the past 1 million years. Okay, well, depending on what you believe about how long the Earth's been around, nonetheless, if it's 6,000 years or 1 million years, they found that the patterns of human development have not changed. He shows that while there's plenty of genetic variation in humans, most of the variation is individual variation. While between population variations exist, it's either too small, which is a quantitative variation, or is not the right type of quantitative variation. It does not mark historical sublineages of humanity. Okay, so using the latest molecular biology techniques, Templeton has analyzed millions of genetic sequences found in 3 different types of human DNA, or 3 distinct types of human DNA, and he concludes that in the scientific sense, there's no such thing as race. Now, there's a lot of big words in there, right? Okay? But if you could just get across to your students the very simple, remember, you're talking to people that are in junior high. They might even be starting to get into biology in junior high. I think that's when you start learning about genetics and biology. I don't know if they wait till high school. I don't know what they're teaching in the schools these days, where they're starting certain subjects. But, if you can just get across to them the simple point that there is no such thing as race, according to people that actually study biology, that have high degrees. This guy's a PhD in arts and sciences. And then there's another article here. And that article, by the way, was from 1998. Man, we need to get with the times, right? How long ago was that? 98, 2008, 21 years ago? They came to that conclusion 21 years ago? Wow. We're slow learners, I guess, right? Or we didn't read that article yet. Now it says, do races differ? The next article. Not really, genes show. In this election year, politicians want to pitch one up and invite the multicultural folds to come on under. What they're saying is, come on under their umbrella, whatever party they belong to, Republican or Democrat. I think that year in 2000, this was the year 2000, it was Bush against Gore. George Bush against Al Gore. And we all remember how that turned out. Supreme Court got involved and they decided that Bush won. It was a very interesting election. Okay, so the message that both parties seek to convey is, regardless of race or creed, we really are all kin beneath the skin. In other words, we're all one big human family, okay, regardless of what color we are. Yet, whatever the calculated quality of this new politics of inclusion, that means inclusiveness or belonging to something, its sentiment accords firmly with scientists' growing knowledge of the profound genetic fraternity that binds together human beings of the most seemingly disparate origins. Disparate meaning different. Scientists have long suspected that the racial categories recognized by society are not reflected on the genetic level. In other words, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. It's all in their imagination. You follow? It's not real. Okay? It's remember what we talked about last class where it said one person's idea or one person's opinion. Somebody comes up with an idea and it spreads, you know, but it doesn't make it true. It says, okay, scientists have long suspected that the racial categories recognized by society are not reflected on the genetic level. But the more closely that researchers examine the human genome, the complement of genetic material encased in the heart of almost every cell of the human body, that means, you know, in your body you have trillions of cells, okay? But they've looked into all the cells, and they've looked, you know, and they know that within the cells, you know, all the genetic material that's encased in all the cells, or the heart of almost every cell of the human body, they say the more most of them are convinced that the standard labels used to distinguish people by race have little or no biological meaning. Okay? In other words, race is, you know, you could take critical race theory and you can take the word critical off there. Just call it race theory. Because that's what it is. It's a theory. There's a theory that there's races. But it's not true. Okay? So they're right about that. Races don't exist. They say that while it might seem easy to tell at a glance whether a person is Caucasian, African, or Asian, the ease dissolves when one probes beneath surface characteristics and can scan the genomes for DNA hallmarks of race. Okay, so in other words, you know, when you look beneath, it's kind of like it's like looking behind the curtain. Remember we learned about the peaceful solution about personality and character? It might appear one way on the outside, right? But when you look inside, when you look under the skin, there's no difference. Now, would we agree we all have blood? Same color? We all have livers, we all have hearts, we all have kidneys, we all have a colon, we all have, etc., right? Would you agree with that? I mean, as far as I know, I have a heart. I have to believe I do because I've never seen it. It's in my chest, right? So I believe it's there because I feel something. It could be heartburn, or I mean, you know, if I have heartburn, I got a heart, right? Okay. I believe it's there, and I believe we all have it, right? So is there really any difference then? Y'all have a brain? Your brain's what sending signals to all your body and your trillions of cells right now, and they're functioning, right? So apparently we all got a brain. So what is this? You know, what is this thing about race? What is this thing about differences? Really, the more you look at this, the sillier it gets. Okay? And it would really be silly if so many people weren't, it would really be silly if so many people weren't actually suffering and dying because of it. Okay? You know, you remember the Rwanda incident? I think it was in Rwanda, where there was two tribes, two African tribes that were killing, you know, one tribe attacking the other tribe because they weren't of the same tribe, even though they were same skin color. Right? They weren't the same tribe, so they were going around hacking people's limbs off and murdering people. See, that's what makes it not so silly, right? Because people actually believe this. People actually have been taught to believe that we're different, like we're different, like, and that we're so different that the other person doesn't even have the right to exist. Okay? So, but really, the whole thought of this is really, the more you look at it, it's just completely idiotic. And when I say idiotic, what I mean is lack of intelligence or lack of knowledge or lack of education in genetics, or even the simplest genetics. Because really all you have to do, you don't have to become a geneticist to figure this out on your own. Just read their research. They're the ones that researched it, and they're all saying the same thing. Okay, let's look over at page 31. Now it says at the top, did you read that? There's only one race. Not so different after all. It says the world's population is an estimated 6 billion people. Well, when was this book written? Let me see. I think this one was published in 2003. Okay, so that was, 18 years ago? 18 years ago, there were 6 billion people. Today, we got about 8 billion, okay? The world's, and you can change that in your book too if you'd like, since you're teaching. And it says the world's population is an estimated 8 billion people and only one race sharing 99.9% of the same genes. We are not so different after all. Now, with only 0.1% of our genes accounting for our physical differences, should our focus be on the variation in the color of our skin or the slant of our eyes? Yeah? No? Yes? What do you think? We should just really learn to appreciate the differences in each other, right? Because the slant of our eyes or the color of our eyes or the shape of our mouth or our hairstyle or whatever, all it is just differences that we all have. Remember, we all have differences. What is more important? The 0.1% that accounts for our differences and has led to hatred and violence, or the 99.9% of our similarities? Now, don't you think it should be more important that a human being has feelings, and that if you call them names or you mistreat them in any way because of the way they appear, that's going to make them feel unappreciated? It's going to make them feel devalued, dehumanized. Shouldn't that be more important? Shouldn't that be more important? It should be. But human beings, I think I told you before, we've kind of been trained to focus on the negative or the wrong side of things. It's kind of like you watch the evening news, right? And it starts out, they're both smiling, good evening. And then they say good evening, right? And they're smiling, and then for the next 29 minutes, they tell you about all the murder and the mayhem and the hatred and the violence and the suffering, and then they go into sports, which is more suffering and violence. And then at the end of the broadcast, the last minute, they might go out with a nice little story about how a boy found his puppy dog, right? But for 29 minutes, they focused on nothing but negativity. That's the way our minds have been trained. Remember, I said it's like you could look physically perfect to somebody else, but you look in the mirror and you got, your glasses on or your magnifying glass out, and you see that one little pimple right up here somewhere, and all you can focus on is that one little pimple. Right? And just forget about the rest of you. That's how human beings seem to be, until you train them a different way. We need to really be looking at the similarities that we have. If we would do that, man, we could make great advances in society, couldn't we? We could all get along, like Rodney King said. Remember that? You remember the Rodney King incident? The colored motorist in Los Angeles who was beaten by police officers. Remember, he was pulled over and he was beaten. They had it on film. I watched it myself. And they beat the man pretty bad. But one thing I admired about Rodney King, and he died a few years ago, but one thing I admired about that man, he said something so simple. People were killing each other in Los Angeles. people were pulling people out of trucks and beating them to death. I remember an incident where a trucker was pulled out of his truck and he was beaten with a brick to within an inch of his life. Businesses were being burned down. There was and these were in the very neighborhoods of the people that were being mistreated. And it was kind of like the riots you saw last year, okay? And Rodney King came on TV a couple days later because the rioting was getting worse and worse. And that man said something so simple, but it's very famous today. People still remember it. He said, "Can't we all just get along? Can't we all just get along?" Six simple words, right? And you know what? After he came out on TV and he said that, things calmed down. Okay? And he was the one that suffered the wrong. He was the one that suffered the wrong. Because the police officers that beat him were let off. They were found not guilty. That's why the people started rioting. And if anybody had, quote unquote, the right to be upset, it would have been Rodney King, right? But Rodney King was saying, why can't we all just get along here, you know? So that's something I really admire about Rodney King. I'll never forget that he said that, and that he calmed things down. Okay, so we really need to be focusing more on the similarities. It says acceptance means acknowledging the many similarities that exist between each member of the human race and embracing these differences by consciously making an effort to become more respectful toward people of other cultures and nationalities. You know, think of it like this. How many of you like Chinese food? Man, I see a lot of hands up. Okay. Isn't it strange that people, they love Chinese food, but some people hate Chinese people, but they'll eat Chinese food, right? Are you really thinking about Chinese people when you're eating the Chinese food? Or who made that food? No, you're just enjoying the food, right? I mean, when you get a new shirt, when you buy a new shirt at the store and you really like that shirt, are you sitting there wondering, I wonder who made this shirt, if it was a black guy or a Chinese person, or I wonder who made this shirt? No, you like the shirt, right? But it might have been a colored person that made that shirt. Would you care? No, because you like the shirt. If you hear a beautiful song or you hear a beautiful orchestra, are you sitting there thinking, I wonder if that tuba player is a certain color? Or I wonder if that person playing that violin, I wonder if they're white? No, you love the music, right? It's really, really silly the way we think sometimes. If, you know, we seem to love everything about different cultures, but we don't love the people. The people are wonderful. People all over the world are wonderful people. And I think most people would agree around the world that they just want to live in peace, safety, and security. They don't want all these problems. They don't want the racial disparities that are being created in the minds of certain individuals and continually perpetuated this notion that everyone hates each other. You know? That might be politically expedient for some people to keep saying that, you know, that everyone hates each other and there's racism is just abounding everywhere, you know. Well, not necessarily. Remember, don't believe everything you hear. Remember, get educated, get all the facts before you make decisions, because certain people just might wanting to be fanning the flames right around election time, right? Right around election time, they might be wanting to fan the flames that there's racism everywhere. You know, don't get caught up in these things. Don't get caught up in these ideas that you're hearing about, okay? The media is really great at doing that, too. They're really great at, creating incidents. So be careful about what you're believing, what you get caught up in. You should not be judging anything by how you feel, by your feelings. You should always get all the right information. And none of us in the Peaceful Solution should be taking sides, right? Anyway, we should, if two parties are going at it, our job is to show both parties how they can have a peaceful resolution. But we don't take sides, right? We just show both parties, hey, look, here's what the peaceful solution says, and here's how you can both resolve this matter without either one of you hurting one another or hurting any property or hurting any other innocent bystanders. That's all we're here for. Okay, so it says it also means appreciating the various nationalities and ethnicities. Instead of finding reasons to alienate each other, let's focus on all the similarities that we share. Alienating, making people feel like a stranger, like they don't belong. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be, you could practice, just by going to somebody that you normally don't talk to and just introduce yourself. Say hello to that person. Sit down and talk to them a little bit. Get to know them a little bit. I remember a person, I'm not going to say a name, but I remember a person that I saw once that I thought, I don't think I like that person very much. Just because I looked at him, I didn't like the way he looked, okay? And I'm sure people look at me and probably think the same way sometimes. I'm just telling you my experience. I saw a certain person that I didn't like the way he looked. And I thought in my mind, I don't think I'd ever like that person. And whenever that person came around me, like if he came and sat at a table by me or something, I would kind of look at him and I would think, oh, I don't know what it is about him. He just, and I would feel like this feeling would come over me. Well, one day, me and him had to work together to do a certain project. And I had to communicate with him. And you know what? Within about 5 or 10 minutes, it was like, this guy's all right. I really liked him. And I'm thinking, why did I feel that way? Like, why did I ever think that way? You know what? It's all in your head. It's all in your head. Get to know people. Get to know people. Try it. Practice it. You might find a really great friend that you're thinking you would never like to hang out with or you'd never like to be around. Try it. So at the bottom it says, of page 31, it says, we are all one family, as you can clearly see. There's really no difference between you and me. Your color might be red, green, black, or blue, but on the inside, there's no difference between me and you. And that's from a student of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. Remember, the youngest child could figure this out. There's no difference. It reminds me of that red, black, and blue, or red, white, and blue. Whenever I see those, I think of police. I think of, most people, when they see red, white, and blue, they think freedom, right? The American flag and all that. I used to think of police sirens. Red, white, and blue flashing behind my car, pulling me over that was before I learned the peaceful solution. I'm just trying to lighten it up a little bit, guys. Okay, so let's turn over to page 32. Let me make sure that I don't have to read you something. Yes, I do. Let's turn over to LP2D. We have enough time here. And let's look at step 6. It says, activity. An apple a day keeps intolerance away. This activity will stress the importance of not categorizing people according to stereotypes. Students will gain, remember, stereotypes meant you have a firm impression about certain things and it never changes. Okay? We don't want to stereotype because not everyone's the same, remember? Students will gain an appreciation for the need to get to know others as unique individuals. Unique. Uni means one, right? Everyone's unique. Have students form 6 groups. Now, you might not have enough people to do this, okay? But if in a perfect setting, this is what you would do. Hand out 1 apple to each group and instruct each group to quickly look at their apple and pass it around. Tell them not to eat it, too. It's important, okay? Tell them not to eat it. You might want to use a fake apple. Okay. I'm not hearing any laughing, but that's okay. Okay, after a few moments, collect the apples and mix them up in a brown bag. It could be a white bag, doesn't matter, okay? After a few moments, collect the apples and mix them up in the brown bag. Place apples on a flat surface and call one volunteer from each group to identify and choose the apple that belonged to their group. Inform students that there are many different varieties of apples. However, when you cut them open, they're all the same inside. And then cut the apple. Well, I guess you're going to have use a real apple here because you're going to have to cut it in half, right, to demonstrate it. So emphasize that the human race is the same. Don't cut yourself to show them that, okay? Just keep it with the apple, all right? We might have different colored skin, eyes, and hair, but we're all the same on the inside. Have students answer questions at the end of the activity found on page 32 of their handbook. All right, so let's turn over to page 32 and let's go over this. An apple a day keeps intolerance away. And can I see that? I did bring some pictures for today because I don't know about y'all, but I really didn't know the difference between a lot of these apples. I'm not a apple connoisseur. I just like to eat apples sometimes. But I don't really, so I did bring a few pictures if I can find them. Let's see. I want to get them. Let's see. Here it is. Let me start reading while this is pulling up. Hopefully it'll pull up. It says, Red Delicious, Granny Smith's, Jonathan's, what do they all have in common? If you had a bowl of Macintoshes, could you tell one from another? Well, I wouldn't be able to. So it has these Red Delicious, Granny Smith, Jonathan. Let me show you the apples. Let me show you some apples, okay? And there's some on here, this list, that aren't on here too. So let's see how many different kinds we can find here. Okay. Can y'all see it? Okay. This one's called a Crips Pink or a Pink Lady apple. And, oh, come on. I don't want to look at that part. I just want to show you some of these apples here. Come on, come on. All right. Sometimes it's, okay, there we go. So we have the Crips Pink Lady. This is called an Empire. I don't know what that reflection is. It keeps doing that. Okay. Here's an Empire apple. Okay, that's an Empire apple. This is a Fuji apple. I'm guessing it's from Fuji. This is a Gala apple. I don't know if you can really tell the difference between these two, can you? A little bit, I guess. Okay, now here's more familiar ones that we probably know. This is called the Golden Delicious apple. Man, that's really, really, there you go. Can you see that? That's a Golden Delicious apple. This is a Granny Smith apple. Now notice the Granny Smith is, this golden apple has more of a golden color. You see that? Whereas the Granny Smith is more green. That's a Granny Smith. This is called a Honeycrisp apple. This is the Macintosh that we read about. Man. The Macintosh apple. And this, finally, is a Red Delicious apple. Those are the ones you probably see a lot of, and plus I think the golden Delicious apple too, or whatever it's called. So those are the different apples. But like it says, you need to ask your students, what are some of the differences among the apples? Okay, well, there was different varieties, right? I probably read about at least 8 or 9 of them there, right? Different varieties of apples. And they could probably all have different uses. You know, I'm not a cook, so I've never made apple pie, but I guarantee you people that make apple pie, they don't use certain apples because certain apples might be too sour. Okay? They might not have the right flavor to make apple pie. So all the apples, like if you make applesauce, you're not going to use all apples. All apples aren't going to taste that great as applesauce. I read about it actually when I was kind of getting ready for the class because I didn't really know much about apples other than computers or phones. What were the similarities that all the apples shared? Remember, these are questions that you're going to be asking your students. Well, they're all apples, right? Was there races in the apples? Were there different races of apples that we read about here? Or they were all just called apples? Okay, they were apples. They have white flesh on the inside. That's a similarity, right? They were all white when you cut them open. They're all going to be white when you cut them open. And there's something else they all have. What do you think that is? Yeah, when you cut them open, they're all going to have a core with seeds, right? Okay. So the only differences then was the outer differences, right? The colors, the shades. That was it. That was all the difference. Well, humans are the same. Hello? Right? Now, what really matters? The human race can be compared to the apples in this activity. We might have different physical characteristics, but inside we're the same. Rather than focusing on one another's differences, black, white, rich, poor, skinny, fat, right? Let's focus on our similarities. After all, we're all human. You know, instead of calling us mankind, we should probably call each other humankind, you know? That way we don't leave the girls out, you know? Even though I think man includes the women, right? But we're all human. We're all humankind, you know? We all want to be loved and needed, don't we? I have not met anybody on this earth that I've come across that didn't want these same types of things, didn't have goals, dreams, didn't want to be picked on, didn't want to be hurt, didn't want to be abused, didn't want to be stolen from, didn't want to be teased and bullied. So we all want to be loved and needed. We want to fit in and be accepted, and we all have the potential to learn the value of a positive moral character. All of us. Everybody does. And hey, listen, I don't care what anybody tells you. I told you the other day, Adolf Hitler, if he'd have been taught the peaceful solution, if it was taught in his school, I don't know what they'd call it in German. You know, I don't have that kind of accent. It would be probably a pretty rough deal, but if they offered it to him in school, he would not have killed all those people. That's a guarantee, okay? And remember what I said, the peaceful solution can make friends out of the enemies. It's been done, and it can be done, and it will be done. It will continue to be done. If we all just take this to heart and really, you know, spread this information to others, share it with others, you know, don't just keep it to yourself. You know, everyone needs to learn these simple moral principles. So today is 7/25, so I believe the 28th, 7/28, the next class will be on 7/28 at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, okay? So please make it a point to be here, continue getting this education. We're going to be picking up where I left off. I think I should have given you that page number before I close my book. But for the next teacher, 32. Well, we finished 32, so we're going to be picking up on page 33 next class, right? So thank you again, everyone, for coming. Keep coming, and have a great evening.